The text message from my brother made my stomach clench. "Can't wait to hear about all your pro bono cases defending criminals, sis. Maybe you'll finally admit law school was wasted on you." I'm Eliana, and my little brother has always had a talent for getting under my skin. The family reunion invitation sat on my granite countertop like a ticking time bomb. Mom's elegant handwriting promising an evening of family bonding and celebration. What it should have said was passive-aggressive comments and judgment. "You could always cancel," Braden suggested, sliding a fresh coffee across my desk. My colleague and closest friend at the firm had endured years of my family drama stories. And give Adrian the satisfaction? Never. I took a sip of the coffee, savoring its bitter warmth. Besides, Mom would never forgive me. "You could just tell them the truth," he said, leaning against my office doorframe. "Partner at Thompson, Campbell and Associates isn't exactly something to be ashamed of." I shook my head, watching the city lights flicker to life outside my corner office window. "They think I'm still a public defender, because that's what Adrian tells everyone. He's convinced himself that's all I'll ever be." The truth was more complicated. Yes, I'd started as a public defender, and I was damn proud of that work. But 5 years ago, Reese Campbell had seen something in me during a high-profile case. Now, at 35, I was the youngest partner in the firm's history. Not that my family knew any of this. My phone buzzed again. Mom this time. "Honey, please try to keep the peace tomorrow. Your brother's going through a lot right now." "Going through a lot?" I scoffed, showing Braden the message. "He's going through a divorce because he couldn't keep his hands off his secretary. That's hardly a tragedy." "Speaking of which," Braden's expression turned serious. "Have you heard who's handling his wife's case?" Before I could answer, my assistant Sarah poked her head in. "Ms. Sutton, your mother's here." Mom swept into my office like a perfectly coiffed hurricane, her designer handbag swinging. "Eliana, darling, I thought we could have lunch before tomorrow's party." I watched Braden make a strategic retreat, mouthing "good luck" as he disappeared. "Mom, I'm working. You can't just show up." "In that tiny public defender's office you're always talking about?" She glanced around my obviously luxurious office with confusion. "This seems different." I'm covering for a friend," I lied smoothly, the same excuse I'd used for years. "What's really going on?" She sank into one of my client chairs, her perfectly maintained facade cracking slightly. "It's your brother. This divorce. It's going to be ugly. Natasha's hired some high-powered firm." "Has she?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. "Thompson, Campbell something or other. They're sharks, apparently." Mom wrung her hands. "Adrian's beside himself. He says they'll take everything." I bit back a laugh. If she only knew. "Maybe he should have thought about that before sleeping with his 24-year-old secretary," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Eliana, he made a mistake. We all make mistakes." She reached across my desk, patting my hand. "Just be gentle with him tomorrow. He's been saying some things about you, I know, but he's hurting." The irony was almost too much to bear. Tomorrow night, at our family reunion, Adrian would undoubtedly mock my career choices again. He'd make snide comments about public defenders and wasted potential, completely unaware that on Monday morning, I'd be sitting across from him in a conference room as opposing counsel's partner. "I'll behave if he does," I promised, knowing full well what was coming. Mom stood, smoothing her designer dress. "That's all I ask. And darling, maybe wear something a little more professional tomorrow? That navy suit you used to have was nice." I glanced down at my Armani pantsuit and Louboutin heels, easily worth more than what Adrian made in a month. "I'll see what I can find." After she left, I pulled up Adrian's divorce file on my computer. There it was in black and white. Natasha Evans versus Adrian Sutton. Primary counsel, Reese Campbell. Partner in charge, Eliana Sutton. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Adrian. "Hope you're ready for tomorrow, sis. Brought some big news to share. Time to show everyone what real success looks like." I smiled, thinking about Monday morning's meeting. "Oh, Adrian," I whispered to my empty office, "you have no idea. 5 years earlier, I sat across from Reese Campbell in a cramped courthouse hallway, my public defender's badge feeling like a target on my chest. "You made quite an impression in there," she said, studying me with sharp eyes. "Not many lawyers would have caught that inconsistency in the prosecution's evidence." I clutched my worn briefcase tighter. "Just doing my job." "Your job?" Reese laughed. "You dismantled the DA's entire case. My client was ready to plead guilty until you proved his innocence." That case had been my breakthrough. A young man wrongly accused of armed robbery, his life hanging by a thread. I'd spent weeks piecing together security footage, proving he'd been across town when the crime occurred. "I believe in being thorough," I said, standing to leave. "Wait!" Reese handed me her business card. "Come see me next week. I think you're wasting your talent here." That memory played through my mind as I walked into the family reunion, fashionably late. The country club's banquet room buzzed with conversation, crystal glasses clinking as relatives mingled. "There's my favorite failure!" Adrian's voice boomed across the room. He was already 3 drinks in, his designer suit slightly rumpled. "Still saving the world one criminal at a time?" "Adrian!" I nodded coolly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. "You know," he continued, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, "I just closed a 7-figure deal last week. Meanwhile, my big sister's probably still making what, 40 grand a year?" Our cousin Maria winced. "Adrian, maybe we should—" No, let's hear about Eliana's noble sacrifice," he interrupted. "Tell us, sis, how many drug dealers did you keep out of jail this month?" I took a deliberate sip of champagne. "Actually, I've moved on from criminal defense." "Oh?" His eyebrows shot up. "Finally admitted defeat?" Before I could respond, Mom appeared between us. "Children, please. Adrian, honey, maybe you should slow down on the drinks." "I'm celebrating, Mom." He threw an arm around her shoulders. "Did you tell her my news? About the merger?" "I was just about to," Mom said, shooting me a warning look. "Adrian's company is merging with—" A commotion near the entrance cut her off. Heads turned as Braden burst into the room, tablet in hand. He caught my eye and gestured urgently. "Excuse me," I murmured, extracting myself from the family circle. In the hallway, Braden thrust the tablet at me. "You need to see this." The headline made my blood run cold. "Tech CEO Adrian Sutton's divorce takes ugly turn. Insider trading allegations surface." "It just broke," Braden said quietly. "Natasha's claiming she has evidence he was trading on non-public information." Through the banquet room doors, I could hear Adrian's loud laughter. "The merger's going to make us millions! To success!" "This changes everything," I said, scanning the article. "If these allegations are true—" "That's not all." Braden swiped to another page. "Look who's representing him." Jesus Thompson's name jumped out at me. The same Jesus Thompson who'd tried to poach my biggest client last year, who dismissed me as that public defender playing at corporate law. "Perfect," I muttered. "Just perfect." My phone vibrated, Reese calling. I answered on the first ring. "Tell me you've seen the news," she said without preamble. "I'm looking at it now. The insider trading allegations. Change everything," she finished. "Listen, Eliana, I know he's your brother, but this case just got a lot bigger. If you want to recuse yourself—" "No," my voice was firm. "I'm staying on." Through the doors, I could hear Adrian holding court. "My sister? Oh, she means well, but some people just aren't cut out for the big leagues. Public defenders are important, I guess. But let's be honest. It's where lawyers go when they can't hack it in the real world." Braden touched my arm. "You okay?" I handed him back the tablet, straightening my shoulders. "You know what the funny thing is? 5 years ago, when Reese offered me the job, Adrian told me I'd never survive in corporate law. Said I didn't have the killer instinct. And now? Now he's about to find out just how wrong he was." I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom. Monday morning's meeting should be interesting. "Speaking of which," Braden grinned, "what are you going to wear?" Something expensive, I said, pushing open the banquet room doors. Very, very expensive. Adrian's voice carried across the room. To my incredible success, and to my sister, bless her heart, still fighting the good fight in her little public defender's office. I raised my glass in his direction, smiling. In less than 48 hours, his world would implode, and I would be there to watch it happen. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I stood in the courthouse, adjusting my crimson Chanel suit, while Reese reviewed our notes one final time. The Morrison case is straightforward, she said. Just don't let opposing counsel rattle you. I smiled, thinking of the much bigger confrontation looming later that day. When do they ever? The courtroom doors opened, and I strode in with the confidence that came from years of victories. 2 hours later, the judge's gavel fell with a satisfying crack. Motion granted in favor of the plaintiff, she announced. Outside the courtroom, Reese squeezed my shoulder. Brilliant work. Now, are you ready for this afternoon? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Adrian's name flashed on the screen, along with a text. Meeting with my hotshot lawyers today. Gonna crush this divorce thing. Wish you had the skills to see a real lawyer in action. Oh, I'll have a front row seat, I muttered. Ms. Sutton? Our assistant appeared, looking nervous. Natasha Evans is here for your 11 o'clock. I found Natasha waiting in my office, perfectly put together in designer clothes that Adrian had probably bought her. She stood when I entered, extending her hand. I had no idea you were... She gestured vaguely. Adrian always said that I was a struggling public defender, I finished, gesturing for her to sit. Yes, he likes that story. I'm sorry, she said quietly. If I'd known you were his sister, I wouldn't have... Stop. I held up a hand. You hired this firm because we're the best. My relationship with Adrian doesn't change that. Reese entered, carrying a thick file. Let's talk about these insider trading allegations. Natasha's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. I found the emails 3 months ago. He was using information from board meetings to tip off investors. The merger. It's not what everyone thinks. Does he know you have this evidence? I asked. No. She pulled out her phone, showing us a series of screenshots. He thinks I'm just after the money. He has no idea. That he could go to prison, Reese finished. My stomach twisted. As much as Adrian deserved to be taken down a peg, this was serious. Have you shown these to anyone else? Just my friend at the SEC, Natasha said. She's the one who told me to get a lawyer. A knock interrupted us. Braden poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Jesus Thompson is here. He's early for the 2 o'clock and making a scene in reception. Of course he is, I muttered. Natasha, would you excuse us? In the reception area, Jesus Thompson stood in an expensive Italian suit, radiating arrogance. Where's Campbell? I'm not dealing with associates today. Actually, I stepped forward, you'll be dealing with me. He looked me up and down dismissively. And you are? Eliana Sutton, managing partner for this case. His eyes narrowed. Sutton? Any relation to the client you're representing? Yes. I smiled coldly. Shall we move this to the conference room? Jesus's face reddened. This is a conflict of interest. I'll have you disbarred. You'll do nothing of the sort, Reese said, appearing beside me. We've already cleared it with the ethics board. Now shall we discuss the terms of your client's surrender, or would you like to continue making threats? The elevator dinged. Adrian stepped out, his usual smirk freezing when he saw me. Eliana? He looked between me and Jesus. What are you doing here? Working, I said simply. Conference room 3 is this way. Adrian grabbed Jesus's arm. What's going on? Why is my sister here? Because, I turned to face him fully, I'm the partner handling your wife's divorce case. Surprise. The color drained from his face. But, you're a public defender. No, Adrian. I'm the lawyer you always claimed I couldn't be. I gestured to the conference room. Now, let's discuss those insider trading allegations, shall we? What allegations? He stumbled slightly. This is ridiculous. Jesus, do something. Yeah, actually, Reese interjected. Perhaps we should start with the evidence Natasha provided. The emails make for fascinating reading. Adrian's swagger evaporated. Emails? What emails? I opened the conference room door, enjoying the way his hands shook as he reached for his phone. All will be explained. Please, take a seat. Mom's going to hear about this, he threatened weakly. Oh, I'm counting on it. I placed a thick folder on the table. Now, about those stock trades you made last quarter. The door closed behind us with a soft click, and for the first time in our lives, Adrian looked at me with something new in his eyes. Fear. You can't do this to me! Adrian's voice cracked as he paced my office later that evening. I'm your brother! Exactly, my brother who spent years mocking my career choices. I remained seated behind my desk, watching him unravel. How does it feel to know your struggling public defender sister holds your future in her hands? Mom called me 6 times during that meeting, he said, running his hands through his hair. What am I supposed to tell her? The truth might be refreshing. The door opened and Braden entered with 2 cups of coffee, stopping short when he saw Adrian. Sorry, I didn't realize. No, stay, I said, accepting the coffee. Adrian was just leaving. This isn't over, Adrian snapped, storming out. Braden settled into the chair across from me. That went well. He didn't even acknowledge the insider trading evidence, I said, rubbing my temples. Just kept sputtering about betrayal and family loyalty. Speaking of family, Braden nodded toward my phone, which was lighting up with another call from Mom. I answered on speaker. Hi, Mom. Eliana Marie Sutton. Her voice filled the office. How could you ambush your brother like this? He's devastated. Devastated that he got caught, I corrected. Did he tell you about the illegal stock trades? That's just business, she faltered. You don't understand how these things work. Actually, Mom, I understand perfectly. It's literally my job to understand. A job you never told us about? She paused, and I could picture her pacing her kitchen. All these years, letting us think. Why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? Adrian made sure everyone saw me as a failure. You never questioned his version of events. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is watching my brother commit securities fraud while mocking my career choices. I caught Braden's supportive nod. The evidence is solid, Mom. He's in serious trouble. Then help him. You're his sister. I'm also an officer of the court. What he did was illegal. The line went quiet for a moment. Your father would be so disappointed in you. The words hit like a physical blow. Braden reached across the desk, but I waved him off. Dad taught us about integrity, I said quietly. About doing what's right, even when it's hard. I wonder what he'd think about Adrian's choices. She hung up without responding. You okay? Braden asked. Before I could answer, my assistant Sarah buzzed in. Ms. Sutton, Natasha Evans is here again. She says it's urgent. Natasha burst in before I could respond, clutching her phone. He's threatening to expose my past. Says if I don't drop the case, he'll tell everyone about my DUI from college. Let me see, I said, taking her phone. Adrian's text messages were a desperate mix of threats and pleading. Drop the case or everyone learns about your mistake. Think about your reputation. I'll destroy you. Classic Adrian, I muttered, always attacking when he's cornered. Can he do this? Natasha's hands trembled. No, I said firmly. This is witness intimidation. We can add it to the pile. My phone buzzed again. Jesus Thompson calling. I put it on speaker. Your brother's willing to deal, he said without preamble. Full financial settlement. Natasha gets what she wants. We just need the insider trading evidence destroyed. That's not happening, I replied. The SEC's already involved. Think about your family, Eliana. Once this goes public, are you actually suggesting I commit a felony to help cover up another felony? I interrupted. Careful, Jesus. That could get us both disbarred. He hung up with a curse. Braden leaned forward. What's your play here? I looked at Natasha, then back at the mounting evidence on my desk. We push forward. Adrian needs to learn actions have consequences. He'll never forgive you, Natasha said softly. Maybe, but I'll never forgive myself if I let him continue thinking he's above the law. My phone lit up with another text from Adrian. Final chance, sis. Back off or this gets ugly. You're not the only one with secrets. I showed it to Braden, who whistled low. He's desperate. Good, I said, reaching for my briefcase. That means we're winning. Where are you going? Natasha asked. To see my mother, I stood, straightening my jacket. It's time she learned who her children really are. As I headed for the elevator, Braden called after me. What if Adrian's right? What if this destroys your family? I turned back, thinking of all the years of mockery, the dismissive comments, the constant belittling of my choices. Some things, I said quietly, need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt. The elevator doors closed, and I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. Adrian had always accused me of lacking killer instinct. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. The pre-settlement conference room felt like a pressure cooker. Adrian sat across the table, flanked by Jesus, and another attorney I didn't recognize. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a slightly rumpled collar. Before we begin, Jesus announced, my client has prepared a statement. Save it, Reese cut in. We're here to discuss numbers and criminal liability. Adrian's head snapped up. Criminal liability? This is a divorce settlement. It was, I said, sliding a folder across the table, until we found these. The new attorney, a nervous-looking man named Paul, opened the folder and blanched. Mr. Thompson, a word? They huddled in whispered conversation, while Adrian stared at me, his face a mix of anger and fear. What did you give them? Everything, Natasha answered from beside me. The emails, the phone records, the offshore accounts. You vindictive bit. Choose your next words carefully, I interrupted. They're being recorded. Jesus returned to the table, his confidence visibly shaken. We need to discuss parameters. Parameters? Reese laughed. Your client committed securities fraud. The SEC has been notified. The only parameters we're discussing are how much prison time he's facing. Prison? Adrian's voice cracked. Eliana, you can't be serious. We're family. Funny how you only remember that when you need something. The door opened and my assistant entered with a note. I read it and felt my stomach drop. Mom's in the lobby, I announced. She's demanding to be let in. Adrian's face lit up with hope. Yes, let her in. She'll talk sense into you. I nodded to my assistant, and moments later, Mom swept in wearing her best fixing things outfit. This has gone far enough, she declared. Eliana, you're dropping this case immediately. Actually, Reese interjected, she's not. And who are you two? I'm the founding partner of this firm, Reese stood. And your daughter is one of our most valuable partners. She's not going anywhere. Mom's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. Partner. Surprise, I said dryly. Turns out the struggling public defender did okay for herself. But... Mom sank into an empty chair. All this time, I confirmed, I let Adrian spin his little narrative because it was easier than fighting it. But now, I turned to my brother. Now you've crossed a line that family can't fix. The SEC will be here in 20 minutes, Reese added. Last chance for a deal. Jesus leaned over to whisper in Adrian's ear. My brother's face went through a rapid series of emotions before settling on defeat. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Full financial disclosure, I began. Natasha gets 70% of all assets. You admit to the insider trading, cooperate with the SEC investigation, and take whatever plea deal they offer. That's insane, Mom protested. Adrian, don't you dare! Mom! Adrian's voice was hollow. Stop! She has everything. The emails, the trades, the shell companies. She has it all. But she's your sister. She can't testify against you. That's spousal privilege, Mom, I corrected. Siblings can absolutely testify against each other, and I will. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Adrian reached for the settlement papers with a shaking hand. You've won, he said, not meeting my eyes. You've finally proven you're better than me. Happy? This was never about being better than you, I replied. It was about being better than what you thought I was. He signed the papers without another word. Mom started crying quietly. The SEC agents will want to speak with you next, Reese informed him. I suggest you cooperate fully. It might mean the difference between 5 years and 10. Adrian stood on unsteady legs. I need some air before they arrive. Don't even think about running, Jesus warned. It'll only make things worse. As Adrian headed for the door, he paused beside my chair. For what it's worth, he said softly, I was wrong about you. You're not just a killer lawyer, you're ruthless. No, I corrected him. I'm just not afraid of you anymore. He nodded once and left. Mom followed, pausing only to say, I hope this was worth destroying our family. After they were gone, Natasha touched my arm. Thank you. For everything. I watched through the conference room windows as Adrian waited by the elevators, shoulders slumped, his whole world crumbling around him. The brother who had tormented me for years now looked small and broken. You okay? Reese asked quietly. Ask me again when this is over, I replied, gathering my papers. The SEC will be here soon. Let's finish this. The elevator dinged, and I watched Adrian step inside, disappearing behind closing doors. It felt like the end of something, but also, maybe, the beginning of something else. Something true. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Tech CEO faces securities fraud charges, splashed across every financial website, accompanied by Adrian's corporate headshot. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Your brother's asking to see you, Braden said, appearing in my doorway. He's in the building's lobby. I found Adrian sitting alone on a leather bench, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His designer suit was replaced by khakis and a wrinkled polo shirt. They froze my accounts, he said without looking up. All of them. That's standard procedure in fraud cases. Jesus dropped me as a client. He laughed bitterly. Said I'm too toxic now. Mom's not answering my calls. Even my doorman looked at me differently this morning. What do you want, Adrian? He finally met my eyes. Help me fix this. It's too late for that. Is it? He stood, desperation clear in his voice. You're the best lawyer I know. Yes, I can admit that now. There has to be something. The only thing left is to cooperate fully and hope for leniency. I crossed my arms. The evidence is overwhelming. Because my wife betrayed me. Because my sister. Because you broke the law. I cut him off. Repeatedly and deliberately. This isn't about betrayal. It's about consequences. The lobby security guard was watching us nervously. Adrian noticed and deflated slightly. You know what the worst part is? He said quietly. All those years I spent mocking you, you were becoming everything I pretended to be. Successful, respected, powerful. You didn't just mock me, Adrian. You actively tried to diminish me. Every family gathering, every holiday, every chance you got. Because I was jealous. The words exploded out of him, echoing through the lobby. You were always the smart one, the driven one, Dad's favorite. Dad's been gone for 15 years. Nah, and you're still trying to make him proud while I'm... He gestured vaguely at himself. This. The elevator dinged, and Reese stepped out, followed by 2 SEC agents I recognized from yesterday's interviews. Mr. Sutton, one of them called. We have some follow-up questions. Adrian's shoulders slumped. I suppose this is karma. No, I said. This is justice. There's a difference. Miss Sutton, the other agent nodded to me. We'll need to speak with you as well. Of course. I turned back to Adrian. Get a good criminal defense attorney. Not a flashy one, a competent one. I can recommend several. You're still looking out for me. he said wonderingly. After everything. You're still my brother. That doesn't mean I'll save you from your own choices. The agents led Adrian toward a conference room, but he paused at the door. Hey, Eliana. Remember when we were kids and I pushed you off your bike? You said I'd never learn to ride it anyway. But you did. The next day, you got right back on. I should have known then that you'd always prove me wrong. The conference room door closed behind him, and Reese appeared at my side. Your mother's giving interviews, she said softly, claiming you manipulated the evidence to destroy your brother. Of course she is. I checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Mom and a text. How could you do this to our family? The partners want to release a statement, Reese continued. Show our support for you. No. I watched through the glass as Adrian slumped in his chair, answering the agent's questions. Let the evidence speak for itself. My phone buzzed again. Natasha this time. Just saw the news. Are you okay? Before I could respond, the elevator opened and Jesus Thompson strode out, heading straight for me. You've made a powerful enemy, he growled. Threatening opposing counsel? I raised an eyebrow. That's a bold choice for someone facing potential conspiracy charges. His face reddened. I had no knowledge of— Save it for the ethics board, Reese interrupted. I believe they're very interested in your involvement. Jesus stormed off, nearly colliding with Braden, who was approaching with coffee. Your mom's on line 1, he said, handing me a cup. Again, let it ring. I watched Adrian through the conference room window, remembering all the times he'd torn me down, all the years of subtle and not so subtle jabs. Was it worth it? Braden asked quietly. In the conference room, Adrian buried his face in his hands as the agents presented more evidence. Through the glass, I could see his shoulders shaking. Ask me in 10 years, I replied, turning away from the window. Right now, I have work to do. My phone buzzed one final time. A text from Mom. Your father would be ashamed. I typed back 3 words before silencing my phone. No, he wouldn't. Then I straightened my jacket and headed back to my office, leaving my brother to face the consequences of his choices, just as I had faced mine all those years ago. The courtroom fell silent as I approached the podium. Adrian sat at the defendant's table, his new attorney, a competent, no-nonsense woman named Rachel, beside him. 3 months had passed since the scandal broke, and today would determine his fate. Your Honor, I began, I'm here today not as the defendant's sister, but as counsel for Natasha Evans, whose divorce settlement is intrinsically linked to these criminal proceedings. The judge nodded. Proceed, Ms. Sutton. The evidence before you shows a clear pattern of securities fraud spanning 3 years. I gestured to the exhibits displayed on the courtroom screens. Mr. Sutton didn't just break the law. He built his entire business model around breaking it. Adrian wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom sat in the back row, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. The defense claims these were isolated incidents, I continued, mistakes made under pressure. The evidence tells a different story. Rachel stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is editorializing. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Sutton. I pulled up the email chain that had started everything. This exchange from March clearly shows premeditation. Quote, the board doesn't know yet. Buy now before the announcement. Delete this email. Adrian flinched. In the gallery, I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. The prosecution has already established criminal liability, I said. I'm here to ensure that the civil penalties reflect the scope of the damage. My client's entire marriage was built on fraudulent gains. Your Honor, Rachel interrupted, Ms. Sutton's personal relationship with the defendant creates an obvious conflict, which was reviewed and approved by the ethics board, I countered. My relationship with the defendant gives me unique insight into the pattern of deception. The judge leaned forward. Are you prepared to testify to that effect, Ms. Sutton? I am. I turned to face Adrian directly. For years, I watched my brother manipulate facts to serve his narrative. He convinced our entire family I was a failure while he committed federal crimes. The pattern is clear. Objection! Rachel stood again. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. The judge frowned. Stay on point, Ms. Sutton. I nodded, pulling up the financial records. The defendant's actions resulted in over $12 million in fraudulent gains. The proposed settlement of 70% to Ms. Evans is more than fair. It represents only the legitimate portions of their joint assets. Adrian whispered something to Rachel, who shook her head sharply. Furthermore, I continued, we ask the court to consider these civil penalties in conjunction with the criminal charges. Mr. Sutton's cooperation, while late, has been helpful in identifying other participants in the scheme. Jesus Thompson, sitting in the back near Mom, shifted uncomfortably. The SEC's investigation is ongoing, I concluded, but the damage to innocent investors is clear. We ask the court to approve the settlement as structured. The judge reviewed her notes. Ms. Rachel, your response? Adrian's attorney rose. Your Honor, while we don't contest the basic facts, we believe Ms. Sutton's personal vendetta. Objection, Reese called from our table. Sustained, the judge said. Counsel, stick to the settlement terms. Rachel adjusted her approach. We request a more equitable distribution, considering my client's cooperation. His cooperation came only after he was caught, I interrupted, and only after attempting to intimidate witnesses. The judge held up her hand. I've heard enough. Based on the evidence presented, I'm approving the settlement as structured. Mr. Sutton, please rise. Adrian stood on shaky legs. The civil penalties in this case will be addressed separately from your criminal sentencing next week, she continued. But let me be clear. Your attempts to blame family dynamics for your criminal behavior are not persuasive. Your Honor, Rachel started. No. The judge's voice was firm. The evidence is overwhelming. The settlement stands. She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. As people began filing out, Adrian turned to me. Happy now? No, I replied honestly. But it's done. Mom approached, her face tight with anger. I hope you're satisfied, destroying your brother's life for some petty revenge. Mom. Adrian's voice was tired. Stop. She didn't destroy anything. I did this to myself. The admission seemed to shock her into silence. Reese appeared at my elbow. SEC wants to talk to us about Thompson's involvement. I nodded, gathering my files. As I turned to leave, Adrian called after me. Hey, sis. His voice cracked slightly. Remember when we were kids and you wanted to be a superhero? What about it? You said you wanted to fight for justice. He smiled sadly. Guess you got your wish. I watched as the bailiff led him away, Mom trailing behind them, still clutching her handbag. The courtroom emptied until only Reese and I remained. You okay? She asked. Ask me after his criminal sentencing next week. I straightened my jacket. Right now, we have more work to do. We walked out together, leaving behind the echoes of family bonds, broken and reformed in the pursuit of justice. Sometimes I realized being a hero meant making the hardest choices, even when they hurt the ones we love. The prison visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Adrian sat across from me in his beige jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. 3 years into his 5-year sentence, this was only our second visit. You cut your hair, he said by way of greeting. You grew a beard. I gestured to his face. It suits you. Not much choice in here. He fidgeted with his sleeve. Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Your letter was convincing. He nodded, glancing around the room where other inmates visited with family. Mom finally stopped sending money to my commissary account. I know. She called me about it. Really? His eyebrows shot up. You two are talking again? We had lunch last week. I smiled slightly. She admitted she might have been wrong about a few things. Adrian leaned forward, lowering his voice. Is it true what I heard about Jesus Thompson? 15 years? 17. Turns out he was running schemes with half a dozen other clients. Your cooperation helped bring that to light. Karma's a bitch, he muttered, then caught himself. Sorry, I'm trying to be better about everything. The prison therapist you mentioned in your letter, she's helping? Dr. Chen. He nodded. She's the one who suggested I reach out to you, said I needed to stop blaming others for my choices. A guard walked past, and we fell silent until he passed. I saw your name in the paper, Adrian said. That big civil rights case you won? You're following my cases? Every one I can find. He smiled weakly. Turns out the prison library gets all the major papers. I've become quite the legal scholar. Better late than never. Yeah. He rubbed his face. Listen, I've been practicing what to say to you for months. Can I just... I nodded. I was jealous, he said simply. Not just of your success, but of your integrity. You knew who you were, what you stood for. I was so busy trying to look successful that I forgot to actually be good at anything real. Adrian, let me finish. He held up a hand. What I did was wrong. Not just the fraud, but how I treated you. All those years of putting you down, making you feel small. I did it because I felt small, and I'm sorry. The words hung between us, heavy with decades of history. Natasha got remarried, I said finally. I know, to that kindergarten teacher. He smiled genuinely. Good for her. She deserves to be happy. A bell rang, signaling the end of visiting hours. Before you go, Adrian said quickly, I have something for you. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Made it in the woodshop here. It was a carefully drawn blueprint for a bicycle, the same model I'd learned to ride on after he pushed me off. Thought maybe, he hesitated, maybe when I get out, I could build one. For your kid. I stared at him. How did you know I was... Mom mentioned you've been sick in the mornings. He shrugged. I can do math. I haven't told anyone at work yet. Secret's safe with me. He stood as the guard approached. For what it's worth, you're going to be an amazing mother. You always were better at taking care of people than I was. I tucked the blueprint into my bag. You know, they have a law library here. Yeah? Could always use some pro bono help with research, if you're interested. His face lit up. Really? You said you're following my cases. Might as well make yourself useful. The guard cleared his throat. Time's up. Adrian nodded. Thank you for coming, for listening, for everything. That's what big sisters do. No, he said seriously. That's what good people do. I'm just sorry it took me so long to see that. As I gathered my things, he called after me. Hey, Eliana. Yeah? When the baby comes, will you tell them about me? I turned back. I'll tell them their uncle is learning to be brave enough to face the truth. That sometimes the hardest victories are the ones we win over ourselves. Still talking like a lawyer, he smiled. Still your sister, I replied. Walking out of the prison, I placed a hand on my stomach, thinking about cycles breaking and new beginnings. My phone buzzed, Braden reminding me about tomorrow's deposition. The world of justice and consequences continued turning, but something had shifted, like a broken bone finally setting right. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sometimes that's enough of a victory to build a future on. I took one last look at the prison before getting in my car. The blueprint in my bag felt like a promise, not of perfection, but of possibility. Sometimes that's all any of us can ask for. That and the courage to keep pedaling forward, no matter how many times we fall.
My name is Sandra, and I'm the mother of an 18-year-old college student named Michael. For years, my husband Brian and I have made countless sacrifices to support his education, including skipping holidays and tightening our belts in every possible way to give him a chance at a better future. We reside in a cozy, albeit modest home that once belonged to my grandmother before she moved to a nursing home. Brian works at a local hardware store, and I manage the front desk at a doctor's office. We live a simple, no-frills lifestyle, which suits us just fine. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, the sun positioned perfectly in the sky, hinting at the weekend ahead when Brian's phone interrupted the peace. I was preparing dinner, my thoughts split between the meal and our budget when I heard him answer the call with a concerned, "Hello? Mom, slow down, what's wrong?" As I watched him pace back and forth, his face drained of color, the call ended and he collapsed onto the sofa, looking utterly deflated. "It's my parents," he said. "Their business has gone under. They're bankrupt and they've lost everything, including their house." My heart sank at the news. "Oh, Brian, that's awful. What are they planning to do?" "They want to stay with us for a while," he replied, clearly worried about our reaction. "Just until they sort things out." I paused, considering our already tight finances and the structured piece of our life that was now at risk of being disrupted. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. Brian massaged his neck, a sign of his stress. "I said I'd talk to you first. It's your house too, Sandra. I wouldn't decide this without consulting you." Brian's parents, Terry and Catherine, were far from easygoing. Accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle, our simple home was a stark contrast to what they were used to. "You know how they are, Brian. This house, it's not really their style," I reminded him. "I know," he replied, his expression troubled. "But they're my parents, Sandra. They're in a tough spot." Recalling the numerous times they had visited, barely concealing their disdain for our humble living arrangements, I knew they would be uncomfortable here. Yet, seeing them desperate enough to ask for help softened my stance. "All right, they can stay, but it's temporary, right? Just until they get back on their feet?" Brian immediately picked up his phone, and after a brief conversation, he reassured his mother. "Mom, Sandra, and I talked it over. You can stay for a bit, but you need to find your place soon. We're not running a hotel." I couldn't hear the response, but Brian's firm, "Yes, Mom, we're clear," told me enough. He hung up and sighed deeply. "They're thankful, Sandra. They'll be here next week." Last week, we told Brian's parents they could stay with us temporarily, and today they were moving in. I stood on the porch, my heart sinking slightly as two large moving trucks rolled up the driveway. Brian, managing a forced smile, directed the unloading process like a parking lot attendant. Terry was the first to emerge, slapping Brian on the back with a grin as if he'd just won the lottery. Catherine approached me next, her perfume overwhelming as she planted a kiss on my cheek that felt scalding. "You're an angel for letting us invade like this," she said. I managed a smile, my eyes shifting nervously to the mountain of belongings being unloaded, a tangible sign of the upheaval to come, as Catherine and the movers unloaded what she referred to as just the essentials from their moving trucks. I couldn't help but gape at the array of furniture and boxes that seemed to flood our modest front yard. "Is this all just essentials?" I mumbled under my breath, trying hard to keep my tone light. "Oh yes, just the basics for now," Catherine responded nonchalantly, waving her hand as if the mountain of belongings wasn't overtaking every inch of space. I bit my tongue, wondering what they had left in storage and if these were the items deemed necessary for their temporary stay. Brian caught my gaze, and I could tell he shared my concern. "Let's just try to get all this inside," he murmured, partly to himself, his tone a mix of resignation and disbelief. As Terry and Catherine directed the movers, with a precision that seemed better suited for a luxurious estate than our simple home, the movers struggled past with armchairs, an endless number of boxes, and even a grandfather clock. "Right there, that's perfect." Terry directed them to place the clock, as though it was the most natural addition to our living room, which was quickly disappearing under the influx of their possessions. I pulled Brian aside as the movers took a moment to catch their breath. "Brian, this is madness. They've brought enough stuff to furnish an entire house."
"Where are we supposed to put all of this?" Brian rubbed his temples, a sign of his growing frustration. "I know, Sandra. I'll talk to them, I promise. Let's just get through today." As the movers resumed, our ground floor transformed into a cluttered showcase of Terry and Catherine's old lifestyle. Every corner was filled, every space overtaken. By the time the movers left, our once cozy living room resembled more of a storage unit than a family space. Dinner that night felt like navigating a labyrinth. We barely managed to uncover the dining table beneath all the clutter. Terry and Catherine seemed completely oblivious to the chaos, blissfully chatting about their journey as Terry opened a bottle of pricey French wine. "Sandra, you really should try this," he insisted, pouring a glass with a flourish. "Thank you both so much for having us," Catherine added sweetly, her voice almost too sugary as she continued. "It's just until we find our feet." Brian, clearing his throat nervously, attempted to set some boundaries. "Yeah, about that. We need to talk about some ground rules. Space is tight and— Oh, don't worry about it, son," Terry interrupted with a dismissive wave. "We'll manage just fine, won't we, dear?" He smiled at Catherine, who nodded enthusiastically. Looking around at the invaded space, the piles of boxes, the ostentatious ornaments displacing our simpler decor, I wasn't so sure about that. Adjusting to life with Terry and Catherine was proving to be more challenging than I'd anticipated. A few days later, as we settled into a new sort of routine, another challenge emerged. It was Tuesday evening, and I was preparing a simple dinner, spaghetti, when Catherine walked into the kitchen, her nose wrinkling in disdain. "What's that smell?" she asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. "It's dinner," I replied, striving to keep my voice calm. "Spaghetti? Where's the meat? The fresh herbs?" She scoffed, peering over my shoulder with a critical eye. Brian, hearing the commotion, came in drying his hands on a dish towel. "What's the problem?" "The problem, Brian, is that we're expected to eat this." Catherine gestured dramatically towards the pot of simmering sauce, as though it were unsavory. Taking a deep breath to maintain my composure, I explained, "It's what we usually eat. We can't afford steaks and fancy meals every night." As tensions flared in the kitchen, Brian intervened, his expression stern. "Mom, this is Sandra's home too, and this meal is what we normally eat. If you prefer something else, feel free to cook it yourself," he said firmly. Catherine's eyes narrowed as she retorted sharply, "Oh, we will, and we expect you to provide the groceries we need. We're not accustomed to living like this." I reached my limit. "I understand you're used to different standards, but this is what we can afford. Our budget doesn't stretch to cover luxuries." Terry, who had been silent until now, added his voice to the fray, booming, "Then perhaps, young lady, you need to reconsider your budget. We are not animals to survive on scraps." Brian's face hardened as he replied, "Dad, that's enough. We're doing our best here." The room was thick with tension, everyone visibly on edge. Catherine huffed dismissively, "Fine, tomorrow we'll give you a list of what we eat. Make sure it's here the next day." True to her word, Catherine handed me a list the following day filled with items like marbled beef, fresh seafood, and various imported and organic products. As I looked over the list, my heart sank. That evening, we sat down with Terry and Catherine, the list sprawled out on the kitchen table. Terry declared, "We expect proper meals, like steaks from marbled beef or the finest fish," as if such demands were entirely reasonable. Brian and I exchanged a look of disbelief. "We can't afford that," he stated, his voice firm yet tired. "It's just not in our budget." Their response was swift and cutting. "Lazy, both of you," Catherine snapped. "Can't even provide a decent meal." Feeling cornered, I eventually caved to their demands. I began purchasing only the highest quality ingredients for their meals, while Brian and I resorted to eating cheaper fast food to save on costs. A month later, I reviewed our expenses and was shocked to see our food budget had doubled. Catherine's luxurious baths had also driven our water bill sky high. Dinner had turned into a nightly conflict, but this evening was different. As Terry and Catherine enjoyed their lavish dishes of marbled steaks and imported fish, Brian and I sat opposite them with plates of the simple pasta we could afford. The stark difference was not just in our meals, but was etching a deeper divide between us each day. Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I spoke up.
This has to stop. We can't keep living like this, eating different meals.
It's ridiculous. From now on, everyone in this house will eat the same food and we will stick to what we can afford. Terry laughed dismissively, a grating sound that tested my last nerve. You expect us to eat that slop? It's not slop, it's dinner. It's what we eat, I retorted, my patience wearing thin. Terry's laughter stopped abruptly, his face turning into a scowl. Catherine's tone was sharp and accusing. How can you be so greedy and lazy? Cooking decent food isn't that hard. They both turned to Brian, their expressions full of expectation, as if prompting him to side with them. That was the final straw for Brian. He slammed his hand down on the table, causing the plates to clatter. First off, this is Sandra's house as much as mine, and you will treat her with respect, he declared, his voice resonant with authority. Catherine's eyes welled with tears, her voice quivering as the impact of Brian's words sank in. I never thought I'd see the day when you, my son, would shout at me like that. Terry's frustration had reached a boiling point as he stood there, pointing his finger accusingly at Brian. Look at you, completely whipped and following her every command. Is this really who you've become? I maintained my composure, though my heart raced. Enough! This conversation is finished. From now on, no more lavish spending on steaks or seafood. We all eat the same simple meals. Their stares could have frozen the room in that moment of stillness. Then, silently, Terry and Catherine pushed their chairs back and left the table. Brian and I sat back down, enveloped in the heavy silence. He reached out and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry it came to this, he said. I nodded, feeling the burden of the evening's events. I am too, but it's the right choice. We can't go on like this. After the dinner blow-up, the atmosphere at home cooled, but only superficially. Terry and Catherine were noticeably quieter, but their silence had an underlying tension that kept me on edge. I sensed they weren't ready to accept the new household rules without a fight. A few days later, as I was cleaning up from a simple lunch of sandwiches, the doorbell rang. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the front door, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I found a delivery man with a large, fragrant bag from a fancy local restaurant. Delivery for Sandra, he announced, checking his clipboard. Confused, I said, There must be some mistake. I didn't order this. Just then, Catherine appeared with an overly bright smile. Oh, I decided to treat us to a nice meal. We deserved a little comfort after all the tension, she explained. I took the bag with hesitation. Catherine, we discussed this. We're cutting back on expenses. She avoided my gaze, shrugging. I thought it was on your tab, dear. My mistake. Brian entered from the kitchen, catching the tail end of our conversation. What's going on? He asked. Your mother thinks we deserved an expensive lunch, I replied, the weight of the bag suddenly feeling even heavier. Brian's expression darkened. Mom, we agreed. No more of this. Terry's voice boomed from the hallway. What harm is a little lunch going to do? You can't expect us to live like hermits forever. I placed the bag down, feeling my frustration rise. It's not just the lunch. It's every unnecessary expense. We've already told you. We're sticking to a budget. Catherine's demeanor turned icy. If you're going to fuss over a simple meal, perhaps we won't bother next time. Brian pinched the bridge of his nose, exasperated. It's not just about the meal, it's about respecting the household rules. You can't keep undermining us. The argument circled for a few more minutes until Terry and Catherine withdrew to their room, leaving the untouched, costly lunch on the table. Brian and I exchanged glances, a silent agreement between us that this couldn't continue. I'll call the restaurant, explain the situation, and cancel any future orders made without our approval, I declared, picking up the phone. Brian nodded, his resolve firm. I'll have another talk with them. This sneaky behavior has to stop. The peace was fleeting. After the incident with the unauthorized lunch, Catherine and Terry simmered with barely concealed resentment. The tension was palpable, and it felt as though you could slice through it with a knife. One evening, while I was washing dishes, the calm shattered once more.
Brian had just come in from the yard, looking tired. I was about to ask him about his day when the sudden crash from the living room had us both sprinting to investigate. We discovered Terry looming over a shattered vase, one of the few household treasures I deeply valued. "What just happened?" Brian asked, his voice measured despite the chaos. "It just slipped out of my hand," Terry responded, his eyes barely reflecting any remorse. His tone wasn't one of apology, rather it carried a defiant edge.
Brian crouched to collect the broken pieces, and I couldn't keep quiet any longer. This vase was an heirloom from my grandmother. It has more history with this house than all of us. Catherine, leaning against the doorway, dismissively said, "It's just a vase, you can always find another." "That's not the point, Catherine," I shot back, the irritation rising in me. "This is about respect, something that's evidently lacking around here." "You want to talk respect?" Terry retorted, raising his voice. "How about the way you treat us? Like we're second-rate residents in our own home." Brian rose to his feet and faced his father directly. "You're here because we allow it, Dad. Don't forget that." "It doesn't feel like we're allowed anything," Catherine interjected sharply. "It feels like we're merely tolerated." Living with Terry and Catherine felt like navigating a field of landmines, but one particular evening drove me to my limit. We were sitting at the dinner table, the epicenter of many past disputes, when Catherine dropped her astonishing new request. "Brian, I saw a lovely coat today, and I think we should use Michael's college fund to buy it," she said, as nonchalantly as if she were talking about changing coffee brands. I choked on my drink, coughing as I set my glass down forcefully. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" My voice was a mixture of disbelief and escalating fury. With a sweet smile, Catherine mistook my astonishment for acquiescence. "It's only money, dear. Michael can take out loans for college. I do need a new coat." Brian, who had been silently fuming, slammed his fork down. "Mom, that's not happening. That fund is for our son's future, not for your shopping sprees." Catherine's expression turned sour. "How can you deny your mother such a simple thing?" "It's not simple, and we're not discussing this further," I declared, my last shred of patience dissolving. Terry raised his voice, now echoing off the walls. "You're being unreasonable and cruel. We are your family." He then threatened coldly, "Perhaps the local news would be interested in how you treat your parents. What would your employers think?" The mix of anger and apprehension roiled within me, but my resolve hardened. "Enough!" I stood up, my voice firm. "This is not how the family behaves. You two need to look for another place to stay. This arrangement isn't working." Catherine started crying, assuming the role of the aggrieved, while Terry continued his barrage of accusations and threats. The dinner ended with them leaving the room in a huff, and Brian and I were left in a deafening silence. Once the house quieted, I retreated to our bedroom and called my grandmother. She answered after a few rings, her voice a soothing balm. "Grandma, it's Sandra," I began, my voice choked with emotion. "What's troubling you, my dear?" she inquired, instantly concerned. I spilled everything, the incessant demands, the threats, the untenable situation with Catherine and Terry. She listened quietly, her occasional murmurs a comforting presence. When I finished, she spoke decisively. "I'll come and stay with you for a few months." "Are you sure, Grandma? What about the nursing home?" "I'm certain. It sounds like you need me right now." When Grandma declared she wouldn't stand by while our family was in turmoil, her voice was resolute and full of determination. Her arrival felt like a refreshing breeze had blown through our tense home. Although age had slowed her physically, her spirit remained undiminished, vibrant as ever. Terry and Catherine were noticeably discomforted by her sudden presence, their unease palpable. "I'll be staying on the ground floor," Grandma announced authoritatively as she entered, her suitcase trailing behind her like a faithful pet. "I expect we might need to rearrange some things." Terry's irritation was thinly veiled behind a forced smile. "Of course, we'll make sure you're comfortable, right?" He looked towards Catherine, who nodded rigidly, her eyes darting about, likely calculating the inconvenience this rearrangement would pose. Feeling a surge of relief, I was grateful that someone was finally setting things straight. Once the movers had adjusted our living space to accommodate Grandma, she wasted no time in calling a family meeting. Now, I've heard a lot from Sandra about the ongoing issues, and I'm far from pleased, she began sternly, cutting through any semblance of pleasantries. Terry started to object, but Grandma raised her hand, silencing him. I'm not finished. Technically, this house is still under my name, and while I've allowed Sandra and Brian to stay here rent-free, that privilege doesn't extend to you two.
Catherine's face paled. You want us to pay rent? She blurted out. Yes, I do. $5,500 a month, Grandma stated flatly. That's outrageous, Terry protested, standing up abruptly. Considering the expenses you've incurred, it seems you could manage by reducing some of your luxuries, Grandma retorted sharply. But we're family, Catherine interjected, her voice shaky. Family doesn't take advantage of each other, Grandma countered firmly. Since you've been living beyond your means at my granddaughter's expense, I find it only fair. Terry and Catherine were speechless, exchanging glances as if searching for an escape, but finding none. And one more thing, Grandma continued. If you find the rent too steep, you're welcome to look for another place to live. Alternatively, if you choose to stay, you'll assist me daily. I need help moving around, meals prepared, and someone to ensure I take my medications. Catherine's earlier bravado had completely vanished. She looked like a fish out of water. Terry, who had always valued his independence, seemed as if he'd been struck. Think it over, Grandma concluded, her voice softening slightly. I need your decision by tomorrow morning. As they retreated to their room, presumably to discuss their limited options, Grandma turned to us, her expression gentler. Don't worry, kids. We'll sort this mess out. The morning after Grandma laid out her new house rules, it was as if a switch had been flipped in Terry and Catherine. I entered the kitchen to find them packing their belongings, a growing pile of boxes near the door. We've decided to move out, Terry declared, not looking up from the box he was sealing. We found a small apartment. We'll take our things and go. Catherine was busier, stuffing items into bags with swift, sharp movements. It's for the best, she muttered, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity as boxes and furniture moved out the door. Brian helped, more out of a sense of duty than desire, as our home finally began to feel like a sanctuary again. By mid-afternoon, the section of the house that Terry and Catherine had occupied was eerily silent, a testament to their swift exit. The echo of their departure lingered long after they had driven away. Grandma, who had been observing quietly from her chair, gave me a knowing look. Well, that's that then. They'll be all right, you know. Sometimes a bit of hardship is necessary to bring people back down to earth. We later learned that they had sold most of their possessions to cover the rent and their other debts. The luxurious lifestyle they were accustomed to had been pared down to the essentials, much like their new modest apartment. Grandma stayed with us for another 3 weeks, her presence a comforting constant in our home. But eventually she decided it was time to return to her nursing home. Driving her back, I felt a blend of sadness and relief wash over me. Thanks for everything, Grandma. We couldn't have managed without you, I told her. She waved off my thanks with a chuckle. Oh, nonsense. You're stronger than you think. Just remember to stand up for yourselves. No one else will do it for you, she advised, her words bolstering my confidence. I said farewell to her, assuring her that I would come back to visit soon. As I made my way back home, the space seemed more expansive and the silence deeper than before. That evening, Brian and I settled into our porch chairs, the gentle evening breeze comforting us. Life had certainly presented its challenges, but we had managed to navigate them successfully and were prepared for what lay ahead. We were confident in our ability to face the future as a team, regardless of what anyone else thought.
I sat on the old, worn-out couch, a piece of furniture that once held memories of laughter and late-night movies. Now it was just a reminder of a time when life was lighter and happier. The room around me felt heavy, filled with the weight of the past. Upstairs, my 4-year-old daughter, Anna, was fast asleep, her gentle breaths in stark contrast to the tension that had settled over our home. I glanced at the clock. It was past 11 p.m. Charles was late again, as had become his usual routine. The sound of the key turning in the lock finally broke the silence. I stood up, smoothing my shirt out of habit, though I wasn't sure why I still bothered. "Charles," I called out softly as he stepped inside, looking more like a stranger than the man I once knew. "You're late." He didn't look at me, just grunted, "Work." His voice, once warm and loving, now felt cold and distant. I tried to keep my tone casual, though a knot tightened in my chest. "Anna asked about you today. She wanted to know when Daddy would be home." He shrugged off his coat, hanging it carelessly on the rack. "Kids ask a lot of things. That doesn't mean we always have the answers." His indifference stung. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Maybe we could do something this weekend, just the three of us. Anna would love that." Charles scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A family outing? With everything going on? Don't be naive, Betty." My hands trembled slightly as I spoke, trying to hold on to the conversation. This wasn't the Charles I married. "It's important, Charles. She needs her father." He walked to the fridge, pulling out a beer without even looking at me. "What she needs is a miracle, not me pretending to be a happy family at the park." I felt my eyes well up with tears. "She's your daughter, Charles. How can you be so cold?" He took a long drink from the bottle, his gaze fixed anywhere but on me. "I'm being realistic, Betty. This isn't the life I wanted. A sick child, a house that feels more like a hospital." I followed him into the kitchen, my voice rising with emotion. "And what about me? Do you think I enjoy watching our daughter suffer? Do you think this is the life I dreamed of?" Charles slammed the beer bottle on the counter, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "I don't know, Betty, I really don't, but I know I can't do this anymore." Anger surged through me. "You want to walk away from your child?" He finished the rest of his beer in one gulp. "I need space. I can't handle this suffocation." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. "Suffocation?" I echoed in disbelief. "Is that what your family is to you now?" He turned away, his shoulders tense. "It's not just that, Betty, it's everything. The constant hospital visits, the medical bills, the way everything revolves around Anna's illness. I didn't sign up for this." I stared at him, speechless. How had our love turned into this bitter reality? "So what's your plan, Charles? Leave us? Start over somewhere else?" He didn't respond, just walked past me, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. I stood there, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. Anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the space next to me cold and empty, I could hear the faint sound of Charles's TV from the other room. The divide between us had grown too wide to bridge, and I couldn't help but wonder if it ever could be crossed again. Once full of warmth and familiarity, the man I had married, the father of my child, now felt like a stranger sharing my roof. Our home, typically a haven of warmth, stood in stark contrast to the sterile, stark hospital room where Anna, our daughter, lay in a small bed, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Sitting by her side, I held her small hand, drawing strength from her peaceful slumber. Nurse Sharon entered the room, her face a mask of professional kindness. "How's our brave girl doing today, Betty?" she asked. I managed a weary smile. "She's a fighter, always has been." Sharon checked Anna's vitals with efficient, gentle movements. "She's in good hands here. The surgery team is one of the best," she reassured me. I nodded, my throat tight with fears I couldn't voice. "I know. I just wish Charles could be here more. She keeps asking for him." Sharon gave me a sympathetic look. "Fathers often find it hard to cope with these situations, but you're doing an amazing job." The weight of loneliness bore down on me.
It's hard doing it alone, you know. He's just not the same anymore. As if on cue, Charles walked in, his presence less comforting than I had hoped. He glanced at Anna, then at me, his expression unreadable. "How is she?" he asked. "The same," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He fiddled with his phone, avoiding eye contact. "I can't stay long, work's crazy." A flash of anger surged through me. "Work, right? Because that's what's important right now." Charles looked up, his eyes cold. "What do you want from me, Betty? To sit here and watch her sleep?" I bit back a retort, focusing instead on Anna. "She asked for you today, Charles. She misses her dad." He shrugged, his detachment forming a tangible barrier between us. "I'm here, aren't I?" Before I could respond, Anna stirred, her voice weak but clear. "Daddy?" Charles's face softened momentarily as he moved closer to her. "Hey, princess. Daddy's here." Anna smiled faintly, reaching out to him. "Stay with me, Daddy." The mix of hope and sorrow in my heart grew as Charles hesitated, and then sat on the edge of the bed. "I can't stay long, Anna. Daddy has to work." Her smile faded, an understanding far beyond the years in her eyes. "It's okay, Daddy. I love you." Charles forced a smile, patting her hand. "I love you too, kiddo." As he stood to leave, I felt a surge of resentment. "She needs you, Charles. We need you." He paused, his back to us. "I'm doing what I can, Betty." But his words rang hollow in the sterile room. I watched him leave, a familiar sense of abandonment settling over me. Anna's hand gripped mine, her small presence a reminder of the fight ahead of us. The room fell silent again, save for the beeping of the monitors. I leaned closer to Anna, whispering promises of better days, promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But in that moment, all I had was hope and the unwavering love for my daughter. The silence was broken by a call from my friend Marilyn, a local realtor. I sat in the dimly lit hospital cafeteria, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal and shock. Marilyn slid into the seat across from me, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. Charles was selling our house, our home. Anger and disbelief swirled within me, fueling a determination I hadn't felt in months. Under the dim lights of the hospital cafeteria, Marilyn, my longtime friend and a dedicated realtor, revealed the shocking news that shook me to the core. "Betty, I can't believe he's going this far, selling your house while you're anchored here with Anna." I inhaled sharply, my hands quivering as I struggled to calm myself. "Marilyn, please try to delay the sale. I need some time to figure this out." Her expression hardened with determination. "I'll do everything I can, Betty, but you need to know he's insisting on closing the sale quickly." I leaned in, my voice steady with newfound resolve. "He won't succeed without a fight. He thinks he can just erase our lives, start anew with her." Marilyn squeezed my hand in solidarity. "What's your plan, Betty?" The word plan echoed in my head, igniting a fire within me. For too long, I'd been passive, a spectator in my own life, overshadowed by Charles's growing indifference. No more. "I'm taking a stand," I declared. "First thing tomorrow, I'm meeting with a lawyer. We'll find a way to halt the sale." Encouragement lit up Marilyn's face. "That's the spirit. Fight for what's yours, Betty. I'm with you every step." I nodded, my spirit bolstered by her support. "I'll also need solid evidence, proof of his duplicity, any fraudulent dealings, anything that will strengthen our case." "We'll start with scrutinizing the sale details," Marilyn proposed. "I'll gather all the information I can on the buyer and any irregularities in the deal." I took a bitter sip of my coffee, its harshness mirroring the turmoil inside me. After all we've been through, I can't believe he's capable of this. To Anna. To me. Marilyn's hand tightened around mine, her voice filled with resolve. "He's a coward for underestimating your strength, Betty, and he'll soon realize his mistake." Rising from our seats, my determination solidified. "He'll regret this, Marilyn. He'll regret harming Anna and trying to steal our home. I'll see to that." Marilyn stood by me, fierce and unwavering. Let's turn the tables on him, Betty. Let's show him he messed with the wrong woman. Concealed just outside the realtor's office, my heart raced as I eavesdropped on the meeting inside. Charles was there, smooth-talking the potential buyers with his usual charisma. His mistress's laughter echoed, carefree and unaware of the storm she was part of.
I observed as Charles confidently presented the paperwork. "This house is a gem, an absolute steal at this price," he boasted. The interested couple, a pair eager yet cautious, nodded as they perused the documents. "Everything appears to be in order," the wife commented. Charles's mistress, decked in vibrant red lipstick, chuckled, leaning in close. "See, easy as pie," she murmured audibly. My anger flared, but I remained focused on the task at hand. This was about gathering damning evidence. The husband glanced up, inquiringly. "And the owner is on board with all this?" Charles's reply came swiftly, a lie so effortless it seemed almost truthful. "Absolutely, she's ready to move on, eager to sell quickly." My fists clenched at his blatant falsehood, my nails digging into my palms as I resisted the urge to storm in. Marilyn, ever the ally in my scheme, smoothly interjected, "If you're ready, we can finalize the sale right now." The couple exchanged a glance and nodded. "We can't pass this up." I watched in silent agony as they signed the documents, each stroke a strike against the life we had built. I remained stoic, aware that this was a moment for clear-headed action, not unchecked emotions. Charles's laughter echoed in the background, mingling with the clinking of glasses as he toasted to new beginnings with the buyers, his arm around his mistress. My entrance into the room was sudden, causing a ripple of shock and confusion among the guests.
"Enjoying yourself, Charles?" My voice was calm, my presence bringing the celebration to an abrupt pause. His smile faltered. "Betty, what are you doing here?" His question hung in the air as I approached them with determined steps. "I'm here to stop you from making a monumental mistake," I stated firmly. His mistress rolled her eyes dismissively. "What are you talking about? The deal is done." I returned a smile, cold and devoid of any friendliness. "Is it now? Because I don't recall agreeing to sell my house." The buyers exchanged uneasy glances. "We were told everything was in order," the husband spoke, his voice laced with doubt. Charles attempted to regain control of the situation, stepping forward. "Betty, you're confused. This is for the best." I shook my head, resolute. "No, Charles. The only confusion here is yours if you think you can forge my signature and get away with it." Silence enveloped the room. Charles's complexion turned notably paler. "You can't prove anything," he blurted defensively. From my bag, I produced a set of documents. "Actually, I can, and I have. These are the real papers. What you have are forgeries." His mistress tugged at his arm, panic edging her voice. "Charles, what's she talking about? Tell me this isn't true." But Charles was speechless, his usual suave demeanor shattered. At that moment, the door swung open and 3 police officers entered. One of them addressed Charles directly. "Charles Johnson, you're under arrest for fraud and forgery." The color drained from his face as he looked at me, disbelief etching his features. "You called the cops?" "Yes, I did," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "You broke the law, Charles, and you tried to steal my home." As the officers handcuffed him, his mistress began to sob, her makeup running. The buyers, sensing the gravity of the situation, quickly gathered their belongings, eager to remove themselves from the unfolding drama. One officer turned to me. "We'll need your statement, ma'am." I nodded, feeling a surge of vindication. "Of course, officer." As they led Charles away, he threw a glance back at me, a mix of anger and regret in his eyes. But I felt no sympathy for him. He had made his choice, and now he was facing the consequences. Marilyn, witnessing the scene, smiled at me approvingly. I returned the smile and exited the office, feeling a significant burden lift from my shoulders. I had stood up for myself and Anna. This was just the beginning. After Charles's arrest, I found myself in the lawyer's office, surrounded by law books and the heavy scent of leather. Mr. Ronald, my attorney, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s, his face marked with lines of experience. He reviewed the file before him. "Betty, your husband's actions have opened up a significant can of worms. The fraud charge is serious." I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly. "I know, Mr. Ronald, but I couldn't let him get away with it. Not after everything." He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "I respect that. Now, about the divorce and custody battle, you're in a strong position, but it won't be easy." I leaned forward, resolute. "I'm ready for it. I have to do this for Anna. She deserves a stable home." He shuffled some papers. "What about alimony and child support? Given Charles's likely incarceration, it's going to be complicated." I sighed, a mix of determination and sadness coloring my voice. The road ahead was daunting, but I was prepared to navigate it for the sake of my daughter.
Anna is my top concern, and I only want what's best for her. As for Charles, he made his own decisions. Mr. Ronald gave me a firm look, his face etched with seriousness. "Betty, you're a resilient woman. We'll ensure you and your daughter get the justice you deserve." Leaving his office, my phone rang. It was Charles. I hesitated but answered. "What do you want, Charles?" His voice, filled with urgency, reached me. "Betty, I know I've made mistakes, but please don't keep Anna away from me." I stopped walking, anger building inside. "Were you thinking of Anna when you tried to sell our house? When you were spending your days with someone else?" He was silent. "I lost my way, Betty, but I'm still her dad. I love her." Holding my phone tighter, I replied, "Love is more than just words, Charles. It's shown through actions. You've let us both down." His voice broke. "I'll do anything to fix this. Please." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see. "It's too late for that. You can see Anna, but only with supervised visits. That's final." He paused, then quietly accepted. The following days were a whirlwind. I spent most of my time making sure Anna felt loved and stable amid the turmoil. Her laughter soothed my broken heart. One afternoon, while Anna napped, Julie, my sister, called. "Hey, Betty, how are you coping?" Her voice always carried a blend of concern and strength. "I'm managing, Julie. It's tough, but I'm hanging in there." Julie was quiet for a moment. "I heard about Charles. I'm sorry, Betty, but I'm proud of you for standing your ground." I smiled weakly. "Thanks, Julie. It's hard, but Anna needs me now more than ever." Her tone softened. "And who's there for you, Betty?" Her question took me by surprise. Caught up in caring for Anna and the legal battle, I hadn't really considered my own needs. "I don't know, Julie. I haven't had the chance to think about myself." Julie's reply was firm. "You need to look after yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup." She was right. "I'll try, Julie. It's just all so overwhelming. You're not alone, remember that. I'm here for you always." The next day, I visited a therapist, Dr. Scott. His office was a welcoming space with gentle lighting and a comfy couch. He greeted me with a warm smile. "Betty, it's good to meet you. How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath and shared my worries and fears. "I just feel so lost, Dr. Scott. Everything I trusted has turned upside down." Dr. Scott nodded, his voice soft and understanding. "It's natural to feel this way after what you've experienced. It's essential to recognize that challenging times are just one chapter in the extensive narrative of your life, not the entirety of it." This notion struck a chord with me and sparked a period of gradual but meaningful changes as I began to rebuild my life. I found solidarity in a support group for single parents. Despite the initial nervousness of my first meeting, the sense of community was palpable as others shared their experiences. It was a relief to know I wasn't alone. The group leader welcomed me warmly, encouraging us to support and uplift each other. I shared my own experiences with the group. As I spoke, my voice was steady, yet charged with emotion. The group members offered me a look of empathy and understanding. Afterward, Abigail, one of the group members, came over to speak with me. "Your story is inspiring, Betty. You're stronger than you realize," she said.
Her words buoyed my spirits, and I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could transform this challenging chapter into a tale of resilience and hope.
Back at home in the calm of an early morning, I sat reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this moment of peace. The divorce was finalized. The documents sat on my coffee table, marking a new chapter of independence. The legal battle had been grueling. I had fought hard against my ex-husband Charles for a fair share of his assets to secure a stable future for our daughter Anna. The court had ruled in our favor, and Charles, found guilty of fraud, faced the consequences. His accomplice, caught in their schemes, was also penalized heavily. In court, watching Charles and his accomplice point fingers at each other was a surreal moment. There was no remorse, only blame. Yet, despite the chaos of the legal battles and emotional turmoil, there was a silver lining. Anna had recovered well from her surgery, and her vibrant laughter once again filled our home, bringing with it a warmth that had been absent for too long. As I sipped my morning coffee, I contemplated our future, a future I had fiercely fought for, one that now seemed bright with promise. Anna was my priority, my beacon of hope. We had come through a storm stronger than before. I looked at the photographs on the mantel, pictures of us at the park, at the zoo, our faces bright with smiles. These were not just images, they were symbols of our resilience and our capacity to find joy even in adversity. Just then, Anna burst into the room, her hair tousled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mommy, are we going to the park today?" she asked eagerly. My heart filled with love as I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to have a great day." Her laughter rang through the room as she clapped her hands in delight. Watching her play, I realized that these moments of joy and recovery, was what truly mattered. The struggles, the pain, and the betrayal were behind us. Ahead lay a path filled with healing, laughter, and a new journey. My life took a delightful turn when I met James. Previously, my days revolved around navigating through one corporate crisis after another. However, entering James's life introduced me to a world filled with sweetness, quite literally, at his family-owned candy shop, Sweet Sanctuary. Here, love and confections blended seamlessly, and soon I found myself managing the finances of this charming little store. "Good morning, love," James would say, his smile brightening up the room as I walked into the deliciously scented shop. Despite any underlying tension, his warmth was a constant reminder of my new, joyful purpose. "Morning," I'd respond, sorting through the mail, mostly bills, which I'd become adept at handling. "Sales are up this month. That new chocolate line is really taking off," I'd share, trying to keep the mood upbeat. James would respond with a nonchalant shrug. "Yeah, well, that's all you're doing. Mom still sees me as the candy king," he'd joke, though I sensed a twinge of pressure beneath his casual demeanor. Just then, his mother, Patricia, would burst into the store, all smiles and invading personal space. "James, my boy, you've outdone yourself. The store looks fabulous," she'd exclaim, patting him on the back. Her eyes would then shift to me, her smile tightening ever so slightly. "Karen, still playing shopkeeper, I see." I'd let out a quiet sigh, keeping my tone polite. "Good morning, Patricia." "Yes, playing shopkeeper is keeping us in the black," I'd reply, avoiding confrontation. Patricia would dismiss my comment with a wave of her hand. Numbers. You should leave that to the accountants and help my son with the real business," her voice dripping with barely veiled disdain. Before I could respond, James would step in. "Mom, Karen's doing more than fine. We're doing great because she's got a business head." He'd put his arm around me, a silent but firm gesture of support. Patricia would sniff dismissively. "Well, as long as my boy is happy, I suppose that's what matters." With that, she'd flounce off, leaving a trail of her presence behind. James would squeeze my side apologetically. "Don't let her get to you," he'd murmur. I'd force a smile. "I'm not. Let's just focus on the shop, okay?" And we did, pouring our hearts into making Sweet Sanctuary not just a candy store, but a slice of paradise. That sense of paradise persisted until I began noticing troubling signs. Deliveries became more frequent, filled not with ingredients for confections, but with expensive gadgets carrying alarming price tags. "Another package, James?" I'd ask one evening, locking up the cash register and eyeing a sleek new gadget still in its packaging. "Oh, that's the new phone I ordered," James would say, his excitement palpable as he tore into the package. "Top of the line." I'd raise an eyebrow. "Don't we have other priorities? The mixer in the back has been making that strange noise." James would wave off my concerns, his attention glued to his new toy. "It's fine, Karen. We've got to treat ourselves too, you know." Part of me wanted to protest to remind him of the precarious financial tightrope we were walking, but I held back, hoping for a balance between treating ourselves and sustaining our dream. I kept quiet, though it wasn't just the phone causing my concern. Patricia, ever the showwoman, regularly flaunted her latest extravagant purchases, turning Sweet Sanctuary into her fashion runway. "Karen, look at this dress, isn't it just darling?" she'd say, twirling in an expensive floral dress that surely cost more than what we earned in a day. "It's nice," I'd reply, my tone measured. "But shouldn't we be saving to fix the sign outside?" Patricia would just pat James's cheek dismissively. "Nonsense, the store is doing wonderfully. James, tell her." James, only half paying attention, would nod in agreement. "Yeah, we're doing great, Karen. Don't worry so much." But that was exactly my issue. I did worry. Every time I checked our financials, the numbers told a different story, one of dwindling profits consumed by frivolous expenses. "Look, we should be careful," I suggested again later that week as we reviewed our financial situation. James gave me a look as if I'd proposed selling the store to join the circus. "A budget? Come on, Karen, it's not that bad. You're being stingy," he said. That word, stingy, it stung. I wasn't being stingy, I was being prudent. "It's not about being stingy, James. It's about being smart. We need to think about the future of Sweet Sanctuary," I argued. But he seemed uninterested, already browsing another website for his next purchase. "You worry too much," he dismissed, half distracted. "It'll all work out." The situation escalated when Patricia decided we needed extra help. It was a Tuesday, our inventory day, and I was organizing our latest shipment of candy jars when she walked in, arm in arm with a young girl, barely 20. "Karen, this is Lisa," Patricia introduced with a flourish. "Lisa, dear, this is Karen, my son's assistant." I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. "Nice to meet you, Lisa, but I'm the co-manager here," I corrected politely. Lisa's smile was polite but distant. "I've heard a lot about you. I'm excited to be part of the team." Patricia's smug expression told me she hadn't consulted James about this hiring. "What exactly will Lisa be assisting with?" I asked, maintaining a friendly tone. "Oh, she's going to help with the business side of things." "You can only do so much after all," Patricia replied, her gaze flitting dismissively over my inventory sheets. I nodded, though confusion and concern mingled within me. "All right, well, we have a system here, so I'll need to bring her up to speed." It quickly became apparent that Lisa's idea of helping was more about observing than actively participating. When I discovered the salary Patricia had approved for her, I was shocked. "James, can we talk?" I asked him later in the office. "Sure, what's up?" he asked, not looking up from his computer. "It's about Lisa. Her salary, it's more than we can afford for her role," I explained. James finally looked up, his expression troubled. "Mom said it was fine. She thinks Lisa's going to bring a lot to the table." I sighed, feeling as though I was speaking to a wall. The challenges at Sweet Sanctuary were mounting, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep our Sweet Sanctuary from turning sour. Despite our agreement to discuss new hires together, especially regarding their salaries, James dismissed the importance with a shrug, an all too common gesture of his lately. "What's done is done. Mom has a good feeling about her," he remarked.
Frustrated, I had to hold back my response. Relying on good feelings wasn't going to balance our books. I left his office, the only one apparently aware of the red flags, while James and his mother seemed to parade through the business blindfolded. I've always been meticulous, double-checking and sometimes triple-checking, especially with numbers. One day, while searching for a misplaced invoice, I found an envelope tucked away in the back of a filing cabinet. Assuming it was just another overlooked bill, I opened it only to feel my heart drop. Inside was a loan document listing Sweet Sanctuary as collateral, with a sum wildly beyond what our humble shop could justify. "James," I called, entering his cluttered office with the papers in hand. As he looked up, I caught a flicker of guilt in his eyes. His first in months. "What is this?" I asked. "Oh, that? It's nothing, just a small loan I took out for store improvements," he replied nonchalantly. "Store improvements?" I repeated incredulously. "This amount could renovate the store 9 times over. What did you really use it for?" There was a tense pause, long enough for the truth to settle uncomfortably between us. "Look," he began cautiously, "I might have used some of it for the house, the one I've been fixing up for us." "For us?" I repeated, my tone sharpened by disbelief. "Or for your gadgets and whatever else you've been wasting money on?" He stood up then, his chair scraping back like a judge's gavel calling for order, yet all I felt was the rise of my frustration. "It's not like that, Karen. You don't understand. This is all going to pay off in the end." I shook my head. "No, James. Taking out a loan against the store without telling me, that's what I don't understand. How could you be so reckless?" Before he could answer, Patricia entered, her expression souring as she noticed the documents in my hand. "What's all this?" she demanded. James started to explain, but I cut him off, pushing the loan papers toward her. "Did you know about this?" She barely glanced at the documents, dismissing them with a wave. "Of course I did. James is just doing what's necessary for our future. And who are you to question him? You're just the help after all." Her words stung, but they also ignited a resolve within me. "Just the help?" I replied, my voice steady and firm. "I've been keeping the store afloat while you two have been treating it like your personal bank account." James's face turned pale, and Patricia looked as if she was ready to erupt. "You ungrateful little—" she began, but I interrupted, surprisingly calm. "What's ungrateful is not recognizing the hard work someone's putting into this business. What's foolish is risking everything for a house that we don't even need." They were speechless, caught in their misdeeds. I left the room then, the documents clutched in my hand like a pending judgment.
Later that day, the kitchen table, usually reserved for casual meals, became the setting for a somber discussion, as if it were a council of war rather than a chat about a candy shop. James cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. "We need to talk about the store's future," he said. I sat down, folding my hands on the table, ready to address the issues we had long ignored. As I sat at the table, confronting the harsh reality of our situation, Patricia's demeanor grew stern. "We need to be realistic, Karen. The store isn't making enough to cover the debts. We have to find money somewhere." It was the way she said "we" that sounded alarm bells. It seemed to imply the responsibility fell on me. "What do you suggest?" I asked, maintaining my composure. Her eyes flickered with a calculating coldness. "You have that inheritance from your parents. It could clear the debts and stabilize the store." I was taken aback, feeling like I was talking to a stranger, not the mother of the man I married. "You want me to use my parents' money, the money intended for my personal security?" I asked, incredulous. James chimed in, "It's not like you're doing anything else with it." "And what about our security?" Patricia interjected sharply, implying that my funds should be a familial resource. I looked between them, my heart sinking. "I am part of this family, but it feels like you only acknowledge that when you need something from me." James shifted uneasily. "It's not like that, Karen, but we're struggling here." "So you expect me to just hand over my future?" I questioned,
disbelief coloring my tone. Patricia leaned in, pressing her point. If you care about this family, yes. I thought about all the long hours and sleepless nights I had spent trying to keep the store afloat. If I do this, if I use my inheritance, I want 1/3 of the store. I want to be an official co-owner. The room fell silent. Then Patricia laughed dismissively, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. You? A co-owner? Don't be ridiculous. You're not business material. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Then find another way to cover your debts because my inheritance is not your emergency fund. James's expression was unreadable, but Patricia's face flushed with anger. You'd let this family business fail? I've tried to save it, I said, my voice quiet but resolute, but I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm. That night, a nagging feeling pulled me back to Sweet Sanctuary. The shop was dark as expected, but a faint glow from the back office suggested otherwise. I pushed the door open, the usual comforting tinkle of the bell now sounding almost ominous. The sweet scent of candy, once reassuring, now seemed thick with deception. As I neared the back, the murmurs from the office grew louder. Through the partly open door, I saw James, his arms around Lisa, the new assistant, who giggled at something he whispered. I pushed the door fully open and they sprang apart, their faces morphing from shock to guilt in an instant. Karen, James stammered, straightening his shirt, it's not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like I just caught my husband with his arms around another woman. Lisa fumbled with her hair, avoiding my gaze. We were just going over inventory. At midnight? With the inventory in your arms? I replied dryly. James's eyes pleaded. Karen, please. You're blowing this out of proportion. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Am I? The cold calm that settled over me was clear. The trust and partnership I thought we had were shattered. From my perspective, everything was unmistakably clear. He stepped toward me, but I raised a hand to stop him. Save it, James. I don't know which is worse, your cheating or the feeble lies. Lisa finally found her voice, though it was faint. I'm sorry, Karen. I never wanted any of this to happen. I studied her, youthful, naive, tangled in the snare of a man unable to own up to his mistakes. You should be sorry, and you, James, should start job hunting, I declared. James was quick to object. You can't fire her over this. My determination was unyielding. I can and I will. Tomorrow I'll be contacting a lawyer. His complexion turned ashen. Karen, please, let's discuss this. There's nothing left to discuss, I interrupted sharply. You've made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Without waiting for his reply, I left the room, my head high, his pleas fading behind me. The following morning was bright, contrasting sharply with the gloom of our household. Having spent the night at my apartment, a property I maintained for rental, I sat at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. It was a message from James. Tempted to ignore it, curiosity prevailed. It was a photo of a bank letter demanding immediate repayment.
Below it, he typed, "We need to talk. This is serious," I replied, on my way, and prepared to confront whatever awaited. When I reached the confectionery, James and Patricia were already there, pacing nervously. Patricia noticed me first, her expression darkening. Decided to show up, did you? She snapped as I entered. I nodded, meeting her glare. You wanted to talk. James handed me the letter. The bank's on us hard. We could lose everything. I reviewed the letter, unsurprised by the figures, yet uneasy. So, what's your plan? Patricia glared at me. We wouldn't be in this mess if you just helped when we asked. Ignoring her, I turned to James. What are you going to do? He looked defeated, running a hand through his hair. I thought maybe you could cover it with your inheritance. My laugh was bitter. I told you I'm not footing this bill without a stake in the business. Patricia stepped forward. You're being unreasonable, Karen. This is a family business. I met her challenge with forced calm. And where was this family when your son was mismanaging our funds and hiring his buddies for kicks?
James opened his mouth to speak, but then faltered, looking down. You don't get to play the family card only when it's convenient, I continued. We'll need to figure something else out. James muttered, You'll have to. Then, unexpectedly, Patricia smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Fine, but if you're not helping, then you're out. We'll manage without you. You're fired. I stared at her, letting the silence linger before matching her smile. Okay. Their astonishment was almost amusing. Just like that? James asked, incredulous. Just like that, I confirmed. I need you to understand that I've meticulously gathered evidence. I took photographs of your dealings with Lisa and kept a detailed log of every dime squandered. If you think you can dismiss me and bury this mess, you're sorely mistaken. As Patricia's smile faltered, she said, You wouldn't dare. Oh, but I would. And as I leave, I'll take my hard-earned achievements with me. Let's see how you'll explain to the bank why the business is floundering without its real pillar. Months had rolled by since I last walked through the doors of Sweet Sanctuary. My life had since aligned with a new rhythm. Paper rustling, the quiet hum of productivity, and resolving challenges had replaced the fragrant whiff of sweets. Now seated in my crisp new office, a world away from the confectionary's chaotic storeroom, my phone rang. Angela's name lit up the caller ID. She was a former colleague from the shop and the only connection to that part of my past I maintained. Hey, Angela, what's new? I greeted, a tinge of apprehension in my voice, knowing that updates from Sweet Sanctuary always stirred old memories. Haven't you heard? Angela's voice mixed pity with discomfort. The shop shut down last week, the bank foreclosed on it, and even their house. A sense of unanticipated relief washed over me. How are James and his mother coping? There was a brief pause. Not well, I'm afraid. They've moved in with his aunt. They've been keeping a low profile. Thanks for letting me know, Angela, I responded, the news settling in. She hesitated, then added, Karen, everyone knew you were the lifeblood of that place. It just wasn't the same after you left. A small, sad smile touched my lips. Thanks for saying so. How about you? Have you found something new? Yes, I'm at a bakery downtown now. It's no Sweet Sanctuary, but it's a beginning. That's great to hear, Angela. You've always had a knack for baking. I'm sure you'll do well.
We exchanged a few more words before ending the call. Looking out the window at the bustling street below, there was a knock at my door. Your 4:00 appointment is here, my assistant announced. Thanks, send them in, I replied, ready to shake off the last traces of nostalgia. A couple walked in, worry etched on their faces about their enterprise. As I stood to greet them, I felt energized by the new challenge. We've heard excellent things about you, Karen, the wife said as they took their seats. They say you're the top crisis manager around. I smiled, feeling at ease with the acknowledgement. I'll strive to live up to that. Now, tell me about your business and let's explore how we can steer things back on track. As they detailed their issues, my mind buzzed with strategies. This was my domain now, where each problem had a remedy and every challenge was a doorway to opportunity. Sweet Sanctuary, with its bittersweet recollections, lay behind me, and ahead was a path I had crafted for myself, one of resilience, redemption, and new beginnings. As our conversation continued, their initial anxiety transformed into hopeful smiles. They departed with renewed vigor, and I turned back to my desk, my spirit lighter than it had been in ages. I realized then that the most rewarding victories often come after the toughest trials, and the future was mine to shape, one deliberate step at a time.
My name is Natalie, and I am a typical 33-year-old living by myself in a snug little apartment. Today, I find myself seated at the dining table, gazing at my constantly ringing phone. I just can't muster the courage to answer it. It's Liam, my fiancé, trying to discuss when he might meet my parents, and just the thought twists my stomach into knots. Liam's persistent voice echoes from the voicemail. Hey, Natalie, just checking in. We really should plan on meeting your folks soon. Call me back, okay? I sigh deeply and my eyes drift across my apartment. It's simple but wholly mine, decorated with bookshelves and a small balcony that offers a view of the city skyline, a serene escape from my troubled past. Growing up was challenging. My father left us when I was 4, and I vividly remember watching him depart with his suitcase without glancing back. After he left, my mother grew distant, colder, and often irritable, and I seemed to become the main outlet for her frustrations. 3 years later, my mother remarried. My stepfather, Vincent, was genuinely kind and tried to bridge the gaps in our fractured family, but my mother's focus shifted entirely to my younger half-sister, Alice. She was the golden child, showered with affection that was never extended to me. Snapped back to the present by another ring, I see it's Liam again. This time, I pick up. "Hey, Liam!" I muster a cheerful tone. "Natalie, I've been trying to reach you. So when can we plan to meet your parents?" Liam asks, his voice bubbling with excitement, unaware of my reluctance. "I'm not sure, Liam. It's complicated," I respond, my fingers nervously playing with a pen. "What's complicated? It's just dinner, Natalie.
I really want to meet the people who raised my incredible fiancé, he insists. I force a laugh. You wouldn't say that if you knew my mom. Well, she's a lot to handle. Liam falls silent for a moment before speaking again. Is everything okay, Natalie? You know you can tell me anything. Taking a deep breath, I open up a little. It's just that my mom and I don't really have the best relationship. She's always been very critical of me. It's nothing like your family. Liam's voice softens. I'm here for you, Natalie. We'll figure this out together. Maybe it's time to face this, you know? He's right, of course, but the idea of confronting my mother, of exposing Liam to her sharp criticism and cold nature, fills me with dread.
"Yeah, maybe," I reply, not fully convinced. "Let's talk about it later. I need some time to think." "Okay, Natalie, I love you. You know that, right?" he says. "I know, Liam. I love you too," I answer. As I hang up, my mind wanders back to those early difficult years after my dad left. They were hard indeed. My mom's world seemed to crumble, and her heartache manifested as anger frequently directed at me. I recall a particularly tough day when I was 6, laboring over my homework at the kitchen table. My mom was striding back and forth, her expression knotted with worry and frustration. "Natalie, can't you see I'm busy? Stop making that noise with your pencil," she snapped abruptly. Startled, I looked up. "Sorry, Mom," I mumbled, trying to quiet the tapping of my pencil. It wasn't long after that day that Mom met Vincent. He was different, kind and gentle. Mom seemed happier with him, but that happiness never seemed to extend to me. When Alice was born, I felt as if I had become invisible. One evening, I accidentally overheard Mom talking to Vincent in the living room. "She's just so difficult, Vincent, nothing like Alice. I don't know what to do with her," Mom said, her voice thick with exasperation. My heart sank. Even then, I understood she was talking about me. Vincent tried to soften her tone. "She's just a kid, Megan. She needs your love, not your disappointment." But Mom was relentless. "She reminds me too much of him," she said bitterly. That night, I cried myself to sleep, realizing I was not the daughter she had hoped for. As I grew older, the distance between us only seemed to expand. Around the age of 8, I tried to share a drawing I had made in school with her. "Look, Mom, I got an A on this," I said excitedly, holding up my artwork. She barely glanced at it. "That's nice, dear. Go show Vincent, I'm busy," she dismissed. But Vincent was different. He looked at my drawing and beamed. "This is fantastic, Natalie. You're talented." His praise felt warm, but it couldn't completely fill the emptiness left by Mom's indifference. Those years blurred into a continuous feeling of alienation, like being an outsider in my own home. Mom was always quick to highlight my shortcomings, especially during my teenage years. Her critiques were relentless. "Don't slouch, that outfit is unflattering," or "Why can't you be more like Alice?" My teenage years felt like navigating a minefield, always cautious, trying not to trigger another bout of criticism or disapproval. I was 13 when her words began to truly weigh on me. One evening, as I was preparing for a school dance, I chose a dress I thought looked pretty good. Twirling in front of my bedroom mirror, I felt a rare surge of confidence. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" I called out, stepping into the living room. Mom looked up from her magazine, her gaze sweeping over me. "You're wearing that? It's a bit snug, don't you think? You should watch your weight," she remarked sharply. Her words struck me like a slap. "I thought it looked okay," I stammered, my newfound confidence crumbling. Sighing, Mom stood up. "Let me do your hair. Maybe it'll draw attention away from your figure." I sat silently, feeling small and ashamed as she briskly styled my hair. The school offered little refuge. One day, while sitting with classmates at lunch, the topic of families came up. "So, Natalie, what's your mom like?" one of the girls, Janice, asked casually. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Growing up under the watchful eye of my strict and exacting mother, life at home felt increasingly stifling. She was very particular about everything, and even a simple conversation could feel like walking through a minefield. "She's strict," I managed to say to my friend Janice, who sensed the tension in my voice. "Hey, it's okay, moms can be tough. Mine is always on my case about grades," Janice replied, trying to show empathy. I forced a smile, grateful for her attempt to connect, but inside I knew my experience was different, lonelier. The tension at home escalated as I grew older and began to take an interest in boys. One incident that stood out was when I invited Carl, a nice, funny guy from school, to come over and work on a project. We were in the living room, deep in discussion, when my mom walked in. She shot Carl a cold look, then turned to me. "Natalie, make sure you're actually studying and not just distracting the boy with your silly crushes," she announced, loud enough for Carl to hear. I was mortified. Carl looked uneasy, and the room filled with awkwardness. After he left, I confronted her. "Why did you have to say that in front of Carl? It was so embarrassing." Mom shrugged, unfazed. "I'm just stating the obvious, Natalie. Besides, boys like him aren't interested in girls with your build." Her words cut deep, and I became even more guarded about bringing friends home, especially boys. During those challenging times, I often found solace in Vincent, my kind and understanding stepdad. One evening with Mom out, I confided in him. "Vincent, do you think I'm unattractive?" I asked hesitantly. Vincent looked at me surprised. "Natalie, you are beautiful. Don't ever let anyone, not even your mom, make you feel otherwise." By the time I reached my early 20s, my confidence, particularly in relationships, had been severely undermined by my experiences with my mom. I remember dating Bruce in college, a sweet guy who genuinely seemed to like me. Despite my hesitations about my mom, I decided to introduce him to my family. The dinner at my parents' house started well enough with Vincent being his usual welcoming self, but Mom was, as ever, another story. She had a knack for offering backhanded compliments that could slice through the air. "So, Bruce, what are you studying?" she asked as she passed the salad. "Engineering," Bruce replied, smiling. "I'm hoping to get into renewable energy projects after graduation." "That's ambitious. Hopefully you're not biting off more than you can chew like some people," she said, casting a pointed glance my way, a clear jab at my past academic struggles. My cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Bruce tried to keep the mood light, but the evening spiraled downward from there. Every comment I made was twisted into a criticism by Mom. When Bruce and I were leaving, I apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry about that, Bruce. My mom can be difficult." Bruce squeezed my hand. "Hey, it's not your fault, but it does make things a bit complicated, doesn't it?" I knew what he meant. The relationship eventually fizzled out. It wasn't just about that night, but it reflected a pattern. My insecurity, fueled by my mom's constant belittling, made maintaining a healthy relationship incredibly challenging. A few years later, I met Liam. He was different, kind, patient, and utterly supportive, a stark contrast to the fraught dynamics of my past relationships. Liam has always had a special way of making me feel cherished, yet the scars from my tumultuous past were ever present, lurking just beneath the surface. One quiet evening at my apartment, as we discussed our future together, the weight of these memories became particularly palpable. "Natalie, I love you, and I envision a future with us together," Liam said earnestly, holding my hands. "I love you too, Liam, but I'm scared. My past, my mom, it's all so complicated. I don't want to drag you into my mess," I confessed, my voice tinged with worry. Liam looked into my eyes intently. "Your past doesn't define us. Yes, it's a part of you, but it doesn't have to control our future. We'll face it together," he reassured me. His words were a balm. Yet, as the day to meet my parents approached, I was a bundle of nerves. Liam remained optimistic, trying to soothe my anxiety as we drove to my parents' house. "It's just dinner, Natalie. It'll be okay," he reassured me, but my stomach churned with unease. We arrived and were greeted at the door by Vincent, whose warm smile offered a small comfort. "Natalie, Liam, welcome. Come on in," he said cheerfully. Mom was in the kitchen, and as I caught sight of her, a familiar tension gripped me. She managed a polite smile for Liam, but her eyes seemed distant. "Dinner's nearly ready. Why don't you both sit down?" she suggested, gesturing towards the dining table. The atmosphere was strained as we all sat down. Vincent tried to lighten the mood by engaging Liam in conversation. "So, Liam, what do you do for a living?" Liam, unaware of the undercurrents, answered cheerfully, "I own a company. We specialize in environmental consulting." I noticed a flicker of something in Mom's eyes at his response. Was it interest or perhaps even opportunism? It was hard to tell. "That sounds impressive," Mom remarked, her tone suddenly more amicable. "A company owner, no less. You must be doing quite well for yourself." Her words had an edge, and I felt a familiar pang of discomfort. The rest of the dinner proceeded tensely, with Mom alternating between subtly belittling me and praising my younger sister Alice, who wasn't even present. Every so often, she would steer the conversation back to Liam, inquiring about his business and future plans. Each time I saw that same calculating glint in her eyes, as if she was assessing his value not just as a person, but for what he could potentially offer. As we left that evening, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. The ride home was quiet until Liam broke the silence. "Your mom seems interested in my business. A bit too interested, maybe." I sighed, feeling drained. "Yeah, she has a way of evaluating people. I'm sorry, Liam. This is just how it's always been." Liam squeezed my hand, his support unwavering. "We're in this together, Natalie. Remember that," he reminded me. The next morning, still reeling from Mom's comments, we were surprised when Liam's phone rang. It was an unknown number. Watching his expression shift from curiosity to shock, I tensed. "Hang on, what did you just say?" Liam asked, his voice rising in disbelief. From the other end, a faint, muffled voice responded, adding yet another layer of mystery to our already complicated situation. Liam hung up the phone, his face a combination of confusion and anger. "That was your mom," he told me, his eyes meeting mine with a stern intensity. "She just proposed something outrageous." A chill ran down my spine as I braced myself for his next words. "What are you talking about, Liam?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath before revealing, "She suggested that I should leave you and consider marrying Alice instead." It felt like a physical blow, the words hitting me hard and leaving me breathless. "She said what?" I exclaimed, my heart pounding in disbelief. Liam nodded grimly. "She said you weren't right for me and that Alice would be a better fit. She was serious, Natalie." I was dumbstruck. The idea that my mother would suggest such a thing was unthinkable. "We need to do something about this," Liam said, his jaw clenched. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about exposing her for who she really is." Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I agreed. "We could record her saying it, catch her in the act," I suggested. Liam agreed. "Let's do it. Let's show everyone her true colors." The plan was set.
Liam would call my mom back, feigning interest in her proposal, and we would record the conversation. That evening, we sat in my living room, the phone on speaker. Liam dialed my mom's number, and I pressed record on my phone. "Hello, Megan, it's Liam," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Liam, darling, I'm so glad you called back. Have you thought about what I suggested?" Mom's voice was unnervingly sweet. "Yes, I have. It's an interesting idea, but I need to know, why do you think Natalie isn't right for me?" Liam probed. There was a pause, then Mom replied, "Oh, Liam, you're such a catch. You deserve someone better, someone like Alice. Natalie has always been a bit of a disappointment." My heart ached hearing those words, but I stayed silent, letting the recording continue. "We should meet and discuss this further, maybe over coffee," Liam suggested. "That sounds wonderful. Let's do it. I'll arrange a time and place," Mom replied, her voice dripping with eagerness. After hanging up, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, anger, betrayal, but also a sense of purpose. We had a plan, and it was time to expose my mom's true nature. The next few days were a blur of planning and apprehension. Liam and I were determined to catch my mom in her own game. He arranged to meet her at a cafe downtown, and I decided to be there disguised so I could witness everything firsthand. On the day of their meeting, I wore a wig and oversized sunglasses, looking completely unrecognizable. I sat at a table with a clear view of them, my heart pounding with every beat. Liam arrived first, taking a seat near the window. A few minutes later, my mom showed up, scanning the room before spotting Liam and walking over with a confident smile. "Liam, so good to see you," she said, sitting down. "Thanks for meeting me, Megan," Liam replied. "So, about your proposal," Mom leaned in, her voice low. "I think it's for the best. Natalie is not suitable for you. Alice, on the other hand, is perfect. She's everything Natalie isn't." I felt a lump in my throat listening to her words. Liam glanced in my direction, giving a subtle nod to indicate the recorder was on. "But why are you so against Natalie?" Liam asked, skillfully playing his role. Mom sighed heavily, a confessional tone in her voice. "Between us, I never really wanted Natalie. After her father left, she just reminded me too much of all the bad times. Alice is my real daughter, the one I care about." Under the table, my hands trembled as I listened to my mom's chilling, heartless words. It felt like a knife was twisting in my gut. Liam shifted the topic, casually discussing mundane things to keep the conversation natural while the recorder captured every word. After about 20 minutes, they concluded their chat with Mom looking oddly satisfied with herself. As soon as Mom left, I removed my disguise and joined Liam, overwhelmed by emotion. "I can't believe she said those things," I said, my eyes brimming with tears. Liam took my hands in his face a mask of sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Natalie, but now we have the proof. What do you want to do with it?" Taking a deep breath, I felt a surge of sadness mixed with fierce determination. "We expose her, Liam. At the next family gathering, everyone needs to know the truth." Liam nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll do it together. It's time everyone saw the real Megan." We left the cafe with a plan firmly in place, a plan to unveil my mother's true nature to everyone, especially to Vincent, who had been in the dark for far too long. The tension was palpable as we all gathered at my parents' house for what was supposed to be a routine family dinner. Unbeknownst to the others, Liam and I had a revelation planned that would change everything. As we sat down to eat, my mom, with a triumphant look in her eyes, couldn't hold back. "Natalie, I have some news. Liam has seen the light. He's left you and is now interested in your sister Alice," she announced, barely concealing her glee. Alice's smile widened across her face, a mirror image of Mom's smug expression. Vincent, sitting beside them, looked utterly shocked, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about, Megan?" Vincent asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Before Mom could elaborate, Liam caught my eye and winked subtly. It was our cue. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. The room fell silent as the recording of Mom's conversation with Liam filled the air. I never wanted Natalie. Her father left and she just reminds me of all the bad times. Alice is my real daughter, the one I care about. The words echoed through the room, every syllable crisp and clear. As the recording played, Mom's face drained of color, her eyes widening in utter shock. Vincent stared at her, his expression etched with disbelief. "What is this, Natalie?" Vincent stuttered, his voice laced with pain. I faced Mom directly. "That's you on the tape, talking to Liam. You're telling him to leave me for Alice, expressing how little you think of me." Mom tried to cut in. "Natalie, this is absurd. You're misunderstanding." "No, Mom," I interrupted, my voice calm yet firm amidst the inner chaos. "It's time you listened. I married Vincent out of sheer desperation. If it weren't for having Natalie, maybe I'd have found someone wealthier, more intelligent, more promising. She's always felt like a burden." The room fell into a dense silence as the recording stopped. Vincent turned to Mom, his face a blend of anger and heartache. "Megan, is this true? Did you really say these things?" he asked, his voice shaking. Mom, usually so composed, was speechless, her facade crumbling. Vincent stood, pushing his chair back abruptly. "I can't believe this. After all these years, I had no idea," he said, looking at me with sorrowful eyes. "I'm so sorry, Natalie." Mom found her voice, though it was frail and defensive. "Vincent, I didn't mean it. It was just talk." But Vincent was resolute. "No, Megan, this is unforgivable. I need to think." He left the room swiftly, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Mom broke down, and her composure shattered. Alice sat motionless, her eyes flicking between Mom and the door Vincent had exited through. Liam took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You did the right thing, Natalie." I nodded, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. It's over. It's finally over. In the days after everything came to light, Vincent filed for divorce. I made the tough decision to stop talking to Mom and Alice. It hurt, but it felt like the only way to heal. Liam and I tied the knot in a quiet, cozy wedding. Vincent was there too, his tears both sad and supportive. He was all the family I felt I needed then. As I stood beside Liam, a new sense of freedom washed over me, clearing away the dark clouds of my past. I'd found true love with Liam, but importantly, I'd also learned to love myself. For the first time ever, I felt a deep, real happiness and a profound sense of peace.